Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Okay, Alex, if you're ready, we're appreciating you being here. You're going to need to take over the share, please.
Okay. If that's the way you want it.
We have to work with what we have. I see it's already showing, I think, something that we don't want to show, but there we go. Okay, you're in. We're seeing your background.
Okay.
I don't see all the foils you had lined up. Maybe they're on the side or somewhere else.
No, they're not supposed to be there. This is the presenter's view. It just disables everything else. So anyway,
I know what you're going through.
oh, I watched you suffer with it as well. It just, makes you wonder after teaching for 4 years. You'd think we'd know what we're doing.
Have it a little smoother, but that's okay. No problem. We work with what we have, as I said. We'll get through it and we'll master it or find the little switch or button that we need to activate.
Well, it's I guess it's fun to bellyache sometimes, right? But I want to welcome everybody to the Knowledge Seekers Workshop here today. And this is part of the North American team meeting. And as we say, it's a very powerful meeting because it follows in the jet stream with Thursday's sessions. And I just need to announce that our team is looking for a word to describe beyond blockbuster, the information that's being handed out by the Kesh Foundation is of a beyond blockbuster nature. And we're extremely grateful because we waited a long time for this. And so it's very interesting how everybody else is reacting to it. And so from our standpoint, it's a very welcoming thing. So enough of the chit chat. This is the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are in the Intermediate Transmutation series. We're going to be talking about the y-axis sphere. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is October the 6th, 2024. And this is part of the Kesh Foundation North America Plasma Education series. So welcome everybody. We have completed last week the basic transmutation series, and we discussed the x-axis sphere, the cornerstones, the calendar, the speed of rotation, emission, and magnetical balance. So where do we go from here? Well, in the intermediate transmutation, this becomes a continuation of all the intermediate series teachings. Please understand this is also basic teaching still. And it's designed to try and distill the thousands of hours of teaching into more bite-sized pieces, although sometimes these bite-sized pieces are spread over a five-course meal. It's a lot of information, and it sounds like uh, we talk a lot, but we have a lot to say. And believe it or not, there's lots more to say. And the more we progress into this, we find out how little we actually really know. And so here we are today. We're going to talk about the y-axis sphere because this is part of our efforts to get off the hesitancy highway. Fundamentally, it's the lowest energy state, and we seem to enjoy dwelling on that. And of course, it's a very slow state because it's in the path of the donkey. And as we can see, the donkey is almost finished crossing the road because we are searching for outer space. And we are bouncing the emission ball onto the plasma highway to our little pie in the sky. And this is the problem that we're having. It's a little pie. It's a little piece of the pie. So it's a little piece of a little pie. And we're looking at the rest of the pie and wondering, why can't we have the rest of the pie? And it's not a matter of having the pie. It's a matter of being and participating in that pie and sharing it with others. So from our little piece of the pie, and we're looking at, as we say in book number 1, the universal order of creation of matter. And so the matter here is our earth space. And, we're trying to bring peace and prosperity to the earth space. And in book number 2, The Structure of Light, it describes how we can bring peace and prosperity to the earth space and what we can do from there on and deliver peace and prosperity to the rest of the universe, because that is exactly what we're trying to achieve. As said in book number 3, the origin of the universe comes from peace and prosperity. Well, when we say prosperity, we're not talking about currency. We're not talking about money. We are talking about abundance. And so when you look at what is happening in the one planet, and we see the possibilities of abundance, it's a lot more than is within the grasp of man. And man doesn't have to grasp it. All man has to do is share it. And when we share it with the universal community, you don't say you're from Philadelphia or from Paris or from Bucharest. You say you're from the planet Earth, because the planet Earth is really one nation, one race. And that's what we're doing for 346 weeks in a row with the Universal Council and Rick Crammon at the head, seeking justice and world peace. And why not? This is the whole thing. This is the purpose of the 10 Commandments, is to write down the modes of conduct that we need to follow in order to be peaceful in a world of abundance. But, it seems that there's some rules for some and some rules for others. And then it seems that there are other rules that are not even shown. And so the whole part of the foundation work is to complete the missing commandments and to understand how we can get on that plasma highway. And we see the relationship of that highway in respect to where we started. And we've always started with our education system on the transmission highway because it has to do with our physicality. And so we like to be in tune. And when you're in tune, the first indication is it's a frequency. But when you get into the transition highway, then we find that we've introduced some choices. The choices are to come back down into the hesitancy highway or to move up to a higher level. And so that is our goal, is to get on the transmutation highway. So here we are in the intermediate classes trying to bring forward the ways and means of getting onto the transmutation highway. So first we have to have an understanding of what a MAGRAV is, and then the relationship of the MAGRAV pie chart with respect to us, because out of that MAGRAV pie chart, we only want that little piece of the pie. And the thing about the MAGRAV pie chart is it has more pieces. So what we do know is the speed of light is in constant transmission, and the speed of light has variable transition. And we're going to unpack that, because the speed of light is just part of the pie. And we use the speed of light to define our universe. So we say, is the universe light years away? And maybe the question is, are we disconnected or conflicted in a zone between affinity and prejudice? So the first discussion, as always, has been the terminology. And so we've advanced the terminology to include a broader scope. So we've always said the x-axis has to do with rotation, and the y-axis has to do with polarity, and the z-axis has to do with the field integration from the first two axes. But we see that they are all individual dimensions and they work together. And so we found that they work together on the transmission level, which is the lowest energy state. But that low energy state is just a medium, and that medium can transition into other dimensions. And as such, we need to take all three dimensions and go through a transition. The X, Y, and Z axis transition dimension. And now here we are looking at these transition dimensions and seeing, well, that's still just a medium, isn't it? And we see that we're now doing the transmutation. And so we completed the x-axis transmutation, so obviously the y-axis transmutation is the next step. So I believe you're seeing the pattern here. And in all cases, this is the medium. But there's a new aspect that we now can finally introduce, and that has to do with the relationship choices. We talk a lot about relationships, but we need to look at the relationships of energy levels and what it means exactly. And we will be trying to unpack that within the next several months, because there's a lot to unpack. So one of the things that we have to understand is that we can migrate from a transition to a transmission, or we can migrate from a transition to a transmutation. And then frankly, we have a singular motion insofar as we can choose to move from transmission to transition, or choose to move from transition to transmutation. And that's from our point of view. So our point of view is a point of view of singularity. And then when we look at the conservation of MAGRAV energy transfer states, we find that there is a discrepancy in energy states. So we see that there's also beyond the physical state with the lowest energy state, but there's an atomic state, major component of the physical state. But other components of the same physical state would be the nanostate, which is a superconductor at room temperature. And then, of course, the GaN state is also superconductor at room temperature. And each of these states increase in field strength by an order of magnitude. And yet, we are always groveling in the lowest energy state. So the reason for that, of course, is that we don't have enough energy to migrate to the next state. And so that migration path is a MAGRAV energy transfer state. And so interestingly enough, this affects our convergence susceptibility. And our susceptibility has to be in balance between the magnetical and the gravitational side. And so this is what we're going to begin unpacking, because we now have relationship choices. So when we look at our own self-serving needs, and they're important, and they reflect our singularity. But now we need to compare the singularity versus the duality. We have to take other things into account, because if we look at the singularity, that's a little tiny portion of a very tiny pie. And the duality, it gets us into the path to make new relationship choices, which is to say, we now have a bigger scheme. And that scheme involves a higher energy state. So the emphasis of trying to get a larger scheme by being in the lowest energy state is basically making more of the same. And if you have what you have, do you need more of it? Or do you need more of what you don't have? So in other words, if you are looking to progress, you need to introduce more capabilities, more relationships, and explore the universe. Because after all, we came from the universe. So what this means is that even when we're making our MAGRAV energy choices, we also have to look at the aspect of the singularity versus the duality. So in other words, we do have a left side and we do have a right side. And even though we are able to go through multiple levels of energy states, all orders of magnitude higher than the other, but it's like a stairway. And you can go up and you can go down. And that capability is something that we've been very slowly trying to introduce. And we need to have an awareness that we can do this. And it's not that we have never done this. It's becoming aware that we have always done this. But the thing is, how do we do this? And what is the key to unlock our ability to do this? So the first thing is to recognize that we have to take other things into account. And so, as we've always been saying, 1 and 1 is greater than 2, because the 1 and the 1 don't necessarily have to be the same one. Well, actually, they can't be the same one. They have to be a different one, because this is an impossibility. But they both become part of the feeding dimensions. And so that takes care of the one side. And then the answer is the third dimension. And so the combination of the two feeding dimensions and the third dimension comprise the three feedback dimensions. And I say, well, why are the feeding dimensions also part of the feedback dimensions? Well, they have this duality, you see, because in the part of the feeding, you feed what you need, and you don't feed what you don't need. So there's an automatic adjustment made. And so that becomes part of the feedback as well. And then, of course, we are the observers of that. So we can't possibly be part of these three dimensions. We have to be in a fourth dimension. And as a result, of course, because we don't understand how this works, we just have to kind of fudge things over and then, fake it, if you will. But when we look at the cups of life, we know that we were able to produce from the physical state ganses. And interestingly, we were able to produce different ganses. And then we wonder, well, where did they come from? And so we could understand the nanocoding process of the monatomic science But did we know how we harvested the energy from the core space, which is inside our inner space, which is representative of our emotional strength? And so we see that there's a difference between the strength of the emotional first cup and the physical second cup. And then we see the combination of the two cups and how they work together. And so this becomes the basis of our discussion here, because not only did we create an emotional Gans and a physical Gans, but we can create all sorts of Ganses. We created CO2 Gans and calcium Gans, zinc and copper Gans, water Gans and amino acid Gans, and then of course we created the gold Gans. And these all became part of the radiance manifestation. And so you can see that actually we can have a radiance manifestation of any Gans, and even Ganses that we never dreamt of, because these Ganses may have been radioactive in another state. But when we're talking about some of these Ganses, we seem to reference them as an elemental component, but all the Ganses are as a molecule. That is to say, they are in duality. And when we say duality, does that mean it's only 1 and 1 is greater than 2? But what happens if there's 3 or 4 or 5? Or what happens, as it is in the Universal Body Enhancement Spaceship Units, 400? And so the combinations, therefore, boggle the mind, but it's not supposed to be mind-boggling. What it is telling you is that these components, because they are part of the earth, are Ganses that can be created on the earth. And so the significance of that is to point out that there are Ganses not from earth, and these Ganses are not available on earth. However, if we understand that now we're looking at the prospect of spaceship travel, maybe we can take some of these earth Ganses with us. And maybe we could take these Ganses to a place where these Ganses would not exist under normal circumstances. And if that is true, then maybe there are Ganses that can come to Earth that are not of Earth, and maybe of some other place. So now we've opened up another can of worms, but we don't want to get into that particular can. If you recall, we had to learn some lessons in anger, and I'm wondering if you did get the message. You know, are we having a failure to communicate? Maybe we need to drive this home. And then we see how forceful it can be. It too can be very painful. And can we get it inside your thick skull? Well, all these references have to do with matter, plasma, and dimension. And so because of nearness and proximity, the physical matter, which we can touch and see, is next to the mattergen matter, which is plasmatic. We can't touch it or see it, but it is a neighboring dimension. And so this constitutes the matter, plasma dimensions. And so we see this as part of our major existence. And because of that, everything else stems from there. So we call that matter plasma dimension the feedback dimension. Is part of the 3 feedback dimensions. And we are dominant in our viewpoint of the feedback dimensions. And this is what we have to expose. So we need to shuffle the cards, or maybe we need to stack the deck. And this is what we did with the stacker units, the 5-cup stacker unit, to show that beyond the cup of emotion and beyond the cup of physicality, at the top is the cup of the soul. And second from the bottom is the cup of inertia. And at the very bottom is the cup of the earth. And so if we were only looking at our own self-serving needs, we found that we were really shortchanging ourselves. And no wonder everything is stacked against us. So when we look at these relationships, and we have to understand that a successful relationship is seeking the balance, what we call a MAGRAV balance between the magnetical and gravitational force fields. And from a scientific standpoint, it involves the balancing of the conservation of magnetic fields versus the conservation of energy. But spiritual speaking, it's, shall we say, a battle between the spirit and the soul. And so the plasma science is not battling anything. It's adding to the knowledge and trying to combine all of these sciences in such a manner that it brings peace and prosperity, which clearly we have not had. So if we haven't had it, why haven't we had it? Excuse me. So now what do we want to do to facilitate that? Well, we have to understand the conservation of susceptibility. So we are all independent plasmatic variables, but we all are seeking balance. And so there's always a seeking of the balance on one side versus the balance on the other side. And so the question then, of course, the obvious question is, well, how can the magnetical balance equal the gravitational balance? Well, so we find that the magnetical balance is based on the variables of kinetic and potential energy. And there's a different set of variables on the other side. So one moment. Welcome back. So there's something that changes the relationship. And that has to do with the susceptibility. And if we're only looking at the two fields for now, we have to understand that there is a principal interaction. And so fundamentally, we say that there's energy in motion, and it's a two-way street. Since it's a two-way street, with respect to transmission, it too is a two-way street. Likewise, transition is a two-way street. And as we discovered last week, the emotion of intention is a two-way street. And as we found with our star formation, we need connections from point to point. And our primary reference has always been the grounding connections, because that's the physical matter state. But we've introduced the magnetical connections as being perhaps even more important, only because we are not taking into account the magnetical connections. In fact, we're going so far as to discount the magnetical connection. And of course, anytime you discount something, it makes it cheaper. So we're talking about the y-axis transmutation. And if we recall the y-axis transmission and how the y-axis is changing all the time, and we put a ping pong ball to demonstrate the transportation method of this transmission. And so there it is on the far right-hand side. And of course, we're going to move it along because the ping pong ball sits in the wave and keeps moving along. And of course, it sits in the way because of the gravitational interaction. But to move the ping pong ball from its gravitational stable point, we had to introduce the magnetical stability. And as such, we move it right to the end, and we can keep on going, and then it hits the end of the road, and then it falls off. But it has completed its journey. So now we understand that when we combine the transmission and the transition, we can achieve this transmutation. So when we're looking at the spherical relationship of the y-axis sphere, we see the conservation of susceptibility. We're talking about the y-axis transmutation, taking into account the x-axis relationship. And so as observers, we see things moving around us. And then we can also feel things moving within us. But what has changed is we can now do the movement. And that may not seem like much on face value, but if we understand the y-axis transmutation, then we can see that we have many choices. If we look at the pH scale of transmutation, and we understand that we can choose 4, 5, or 6, or we can choose 8, 9, or 10. And those would be choices of singularity. But if we understand the choices of duality, and we understand that if we choose 8, we're going to choose 6, and if we choose 5, we're going to choose 9, and if we choose 10, we're going to choose 4, because the combination of those 3 choices always adds up to 14, because that's the pH scale of water on this planet. And so the principal matter, as it comes to this planet in the form of what we call PM ticks, these are magnetical energy forms that come together. And they come together with the principal transition and convergence fields. And they convert into a plasmagen. And that plasmagen is in a plasmatic condition. And that plasmagen has to take something else into account. The balance of a maggrav field, which is a balance between the magnetical forces and the gravitational forces, and that balance is a field interaction, which we call inertia. And that inertia field then has an effect of a rotating field. And so when we look at our planet, now we can see that if we stand on the North Pole, the rotation is counterclockwise, but if we stand on the South Pole, the rotation is counterclockwise. So we have to look through to the other side to see how these 2 rotating fields are actually interlaced and intertwined. So we see that there's a spherical interaction. And so the primary action is a counterclockwise rotation, but that's from our point of view. So when we look at these interacting hemispheres, we notice that there's no friction. But there's always an angular interaction, because if we really look closely, we can see those principal fields we talked about at the core, and we can see the interaction of the magnetical and gravitational fields. And since they are traveling in opposite directions, but since they're intertwined, then it would automatically assume to us anyway that there's a friction, but there's not. It's very smooth. It's a very smooth operation. But if we're seeking a balance, then the question becomes, where on this field are we alluding to this balanced position? And so we have to understand that wherever we are, we need to be in a balanced position between the gravitational and magnetical fields. So the fundamental energy pathways, as we understand it, is the North Pole to the South Pole, or from the South Pole to the North Pole. Either way, it's a polar point of view, but now we see that that is a two-way street. And so to maintain this balance, we have to have a balance on each way. And so that would be the balance of our singularity. But that's not the way the universe works, because when we look at our singularity, we can have an emission of intention. And that emission of intention has to go somewhere. And so we can launch that to a certain target point, which in its own has a singularity. But in return, it has an emission of intention. And if that emission of intention is in balance with our emission of intention, then it will effectively launch an emission to our target point, and we have achieved the balance, which is a dynamic plasma interaction. And fundamentally, it could be considered a duality. So that duality means we now have a y-axis transmutation dimension that says our intention comes from a bigger field. There's more. In fact, it's stretching out beyond the graph. And it comes to us in a point of conversion and convergence, and then a divergence. And we use that divergence to create all of our dimensions, including our uncut physicality. And so we find that we have a transition transmission of elemental susceptibility, which allows us to, shall we say, walk along the lower x-axis transmission plane. But it's because of these gaps in the transmission plane that we can effectively go through the y-axis transition. And when we take these two things into account, we have now entered a duality, which gives us a transmutation dimension. And so we need to discuss further this transmutation dimension. So this duality tells us that, well, in the one direction, we can start at the Magrav atomic state and go to the monatomic state and the polyatomic state, and then, of course, into the plasma state field. And therefore, we can still go beyond that. But then if we're looking at the other way, we can come down step by step until we hit this Coulomb barrier, which is our physicality. Well, if we stop there, clearly we are going to eventually go out of balance. So therefore, this barrier is representative of our field strength in this environment. And so if we were to exit from this environment, we would go one step beyond that. And that's where we are. We're in the post-Sanya conference era, where we, in the spring of 2024, we discovered that there's gold in them there hills, but that gold is more than what you see. We have path choice. The y-axis sphere gives us more path choices. And when we talk about path choice, it involves a path link and susceptibility. So the emission of our attention is referenced as magnetical. And in the emission of our retention is referenced as gravitational. And so the interaction of these two creates the emission of intention. And we need to consider nearness and proximity. So how far is it? How near is it? And I don't know. How big is large? All I know is that with our plasma vision, we can see different fields. And then if we have those fields and they're within a containment, then there must be one step beyond. One step beyond in a higher energy state, or one step beyond in a lower energy state. Because what comes around goes around. And so at this point, we may have a point of conflict. But we have to understand that this point of conflict requires a conflict resolution and converts it into a point of containment. So that creates a binding. And we've interpreted that energy binding as a self-serving need. And because we need it, and it's very important to us, then we sometimes do it at the expense of others. And when I say sometimes, really sometimes as a way of life, we steal, lie, cheat, and murder others to get their energy. And we don't need to do that, you see, because the plasma rule is the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And if we are beggars and always working from a point of weakness, then we will get this higher strength. But since we are manifest in this binding zone as conflicted individuals, then we can't recognize the weakness. Our vision is obscured. We think we're higher. We think we're more equal. Equal is weakable. So we are in the post-March 15th, 2024 era where we can make choices. And so this new selection process allows us from our inner space to look at that bountiful space of our earth space. And we've already made that decision, haven't we? Because we were all born here. But now we have a choice to go to that transmutation space of outer space. And so we find that we have more capabilities than the soul of a stone, because a stone is looking at anchorage to this earth. And we like to have a commemoration when we create statues of idolatry. And we acknowledge our existence as confirmation. We're on this third rock from the sun. And so what we're emitting is the emission of declension. In other words, what you see is what you get. Well, then that's all you get. And you can say, well, I was here. Well, whoopee for you, which every element on the periodic table of elements is representing of the same prejudice. These are all the earth space range details. And you say, well, I am carbon and I am number one, or I am argon and I am number one. Well, maybe I'm germanium and I'm number one. And so maybe all of these elements on the periodic table of elements are in a conflict, in a competition. And of course, we are in a frenzy to find gold in them there hills, or lithium, or whatever the soup du jour is. We're looking for a gravitational confirmation. Well, we have it. We have the hydrogen emission spectrum, which is a unique fingerprint of hydrogen and how it arrived here on Earth and is listed on the periodic table of elements as the first element. But there's one problem. it doesn't have a neutron. All the other elements have neutrons. So in order for the hydrogen to travel, it becomes an emission spectrum from the gravitational force field that is emitted from the sun, and the gravitational force field is emitted from the earth. And then, of course, there's always the gravitational force field that is emitted from the universe. And that's very nebulous, isn't it? But when they all converge together, we have the gravitational confirmation of the arrival of the hydrogen. And we have a fingerprint to prove it. So we know conclusively, and this becomes the cornerstone of science. And that science involves different states of dimensions. We have the nano cornerstones, the pico, the gans, the plasma, and the soul cornerstones. And each of these become channels for the emission of intention. And so the emission of intention also has a strength dependent on which channel you work on. And so each of these channels has a transmission spectrum. And this transition spectrum indicates a susceptibility and shows the range of the surface superficiality, which is representative in our physicality, and the internal substance, which represents our plasma substrate. And so we see that there's a movement from the gravitational to the magnetical, whereas the gravitational is stronger and the magnetical is weaker. But it's in balance. And it's a two-way street. So you can't just look at this in singularity. What you have to look at is at that balance point within our colors, visible color spectrum, the point of containment of the plasmatic interaction. And so within that limited point of containment, we have to understand, and we have the proof, of course, that there are energy states beyond that visible spectrum. And if they are beyond that visible spectrum, then we can also go one step beyond that in both directions. So this principal matter interaction then has different flavors. And all of these interactions begin with energy packs. And as such, they come in a parcel and they get delivered. And they enter either equatorially through the rotation or through the polar interaction. And it's not really a competition. It all has to do with the field strength and the common denominator. So the ultimate goal, of course, is a plasma balance. And so through these knowledge seekers workshops, we're seeking knowledge and wisdom, because that can give you a deeper insight, and experience will change a man's perspective. And it's very important because it allows us to reflect on life. And we need to reflect on life, because as we try and rationalize what we're doing in life, we find that misconduct becomes harder to rationalize. And that historical reference becomes meaningless, because we have to understand that the pH balance seeking becomes a polar balance. The plasma balance is uncut in any state, and state dependency and transcendence is also uncut. So the emotion of intention is interdependent and manifests in both plasma state and matter state. Different states, different field strengths. So when we're looking at the MAGRAPH pH, we see that the speed of rotation affects the transmutation transition. And when we look at our planet, we find that the emission of intention transmutes in both the micro and the macro. And with the pH of peace, we see that there are many points on the field strength of the dove, because the intention of peace is all-encompassing. And when we say all-encompassing, beyond just our little tiny pie. So we are in the process of completing the transmutation test in the month of October. Will be the fourth of a series of 4 transmutation programs. And maybe we'll be able to take the transmutation training wheels off after these sessions. But we all have to learn somehow. Even old dogs learn new tricks. But there are more tricks still to go. And the Keshe Foundation is offering the space plasma research teams. And so advanced scientists everywhere have an opportunity to do research of advanced science. So 558 weeks we've been trying to tell the public about the plasma science through the Knowledge Seekers workshops. It's important to understand that the limitations of nuclear science have been overcome, and that we all have the capability of transcending these limitations. And when we seek the greater oneness, remember that that part of the oneness is greater. And compare that to the schemes. And then you can decide. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science, welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers, learning about the new selection process of the new plasma science requires a world peace treaty. It needs to be signed. Sign it with a pen, display it on your wall. Be proud to display it. Are you ashamed of bringing peace to this planet? Or are you proud to bring chaos? It's your choice, isn't it? Well, we have choices as well. And we find that in this 3-dimensional universe, is man the reactor? Can man manifest heaven through field transmutation? Or can we go into outer space without a peace dome? Well, how can we transmute through the dimensions of history? Lots of questions, but many combinations exist of the x-axis and y-axis sphere creation, because the plasmatic manifestation leads into the physical transmission dimensions, and plasma science needs to be delivered daily via the peace dome in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And that's the end of this class. And thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the beginning of this new trip.
Well, thank you again, Alex. It almost sounds like you've come from the universe, or parts of you have come from the universe. You seem to be very familiar with this whole process, or at least aspects of it. Maybe you're a very old soul.
Well, in a sentence, I can say that I have experienced some of the benefits of changing my thinking. The main point that a lot of people say is we're backwards. It turns their knowledge upside down. Well, it may have to be turned upside down. But why did we get upside down in the first place? Our old knowledge was upside down, and it's not working. It's not working. And so we turn it upside down and we say, oh, it's working. Well, what am I going to do? I'm going to go back to the old way? Really? You want to go back on the donkey? The donkey doesn't even want you to go back on the donkey. How selfish. Welcome to the new outer space age. Thanks, Mark.
Right, and it's becoming more and more exciting. If he can put the energy of food in an envelope to deliver it to you, or energy itself as power or lighting and can deliver it to you. Wellness can be put in a package. Couldn't, and again, we're learning this process, so that's why we're having system assist. So couldn't he, as he had explained a number of workshops ago, put you in an envelope and transmute you? I don't think this is till we learn the full process of how to do it within ourselves. This is what all these systems are about. I've been calling it system assist, training wheels, like another person likes to say, until we're ready to take the training wheels off. And I know he mentioned about transmuting people perhaps into Washington. We've talked about this a number of times in a number of other sessions, transmuting people in, but now putting food energies in packages and delivering them, wellness in packages, energy packages and delivering them. Couldn't he put the man in the package and also deliver the man in a type of transmutation? Do you think this is what's going to happen, or will people transmute first? Perhaps a combination? Any thoughts on that, Alex?
Well, certainly, those are excellent questions. And had you asked those questions about 30 years ago, uh, you would have received massive criticism for even asking those questions, because the concept behind the question is, extreme, shall we say, compared to our
Wasn't
convention.
there, right?
So now we've come to the point where we can ask these questions and not feel deficient in terms of getting the answer. What has always been a problem for me, and I'm not claiming exclusivity on this, is that when I was to ask a question, and we all understand that, you know, as we emerge from being babies, we become children, we go to school. And so at that age, we are already uh, accustomed to asking questions from people who we have respect for as people who are carrying different knowledge, more knowledge than we have. That's the whole purpose of asking the question. But when we get into senior grades and university, and we ask the question, and these people are in a position of professorship and PhD, shall we say, people who are well schooled. And the answer is, I don't know. Well, I get that same answer, from the guy in the coffee shop. Ask someone in the coffee shop, where did you come from, before you were born? They'll look at you like, what a stupid question. Why are you asking me? Why do you think I would know? Well, the scientist who is an expert in physics doesn't know. So I figured I might as well ask you. And, you're telling me you don't know. So I'm not surprised. The common man and the scholarly man come up with the same answer. Well, is that acceptable? So we had to deal with that. And I guess we did. But the moment we have an indication that there is another answer, me personally, I grabbed at it. And why? Because all these years, that question had gone unanswered. And if there was a possibility to answer that question, I did not want to be burdened with a nagging doubt that that answer might be the answer that I was seeking. So my search and my research on that particular answer was primarily determined to disprove the answer. to make sure that that answer is not the correct answer. Since I've been with the foundation, I have not been able to disprove it. I've been able to disprove all the other theories, whether it's string beans or biggity bangities. Well, when we get down to the real essential plasma science, and you say, wow, you know, that really is far out. What proof do you have? Well, I was able to alter the pH of water in a remote manner. I was able to display a rotating field in a field of GANs in a remote manner. I was able to communicate with other people in a remote manner. I was not able to do that before. Well, I was not able to recognize that I was able to do that more because I was told, we don't know. Well, I still don't know. But what I do know is that I'm able to use it. And if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's where we're at right now. So those who don't know and don't want to know, you've lost it. We have to understand that the train is pulled into the station, and the train has a schedule, and it will be leaving the station. And we have choices. Get on the train or don't get on the train. The train is leaving on schedule. And we're all part of this planet, one planet. So this train is the planetary plane to take us into heaven. And heaven is wherever you want to be, whether it's on earth or in some other place. And that's the truth. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, it seems like it applies to us, but it also applies to the nations as well. He keeps saying you're going to be left behind. You'll have the donkey technology. You'll sanction yourself by not coming on board or taking the tip, the gift, technology in exchange for peace from the Kesh Foundation. So yeah, what we see in the micro, in a way, we're seeing in the macro, meaning individuals as well as nations will be left. I just want to welcome Nikolai and thank you for joining us. I was wondering, are you the guy that put Sasha's hand up remotely?
Hey guys, not on purpose.
Okay.
I was a little
Yeah,
surprised when I heard his voice go, whoops, nope.
yeah, yeah.
Because generally speaking, it's an open invitation from the soul to say something.
Mhm. Very good. And you know, we do have these books, number one, number two, and number three, but I know in one of the teachings he went through all the number of books, number four, number five, the different subjects. I can't remember them all, but he did say book number 8 is about the soul, and book, is it number 9, is the creation of magnetic fields. I thought we understood the creation of magnetic fields already. Maybe we haven't fully understood the soul, but I think there's a lot more to. And he did mention other books besides these two, book number 8 about the soul, and then the creation of magnetic fields. So there's still a bit to write and learn about. I know he talked about the student being in its infancy. So in a way, I think it's to keep us humble and not think that we have it. That's part or one of the secrets. And you can see that with Mr. Kesh. He's carrying the totality, but he says, when I come into a meeting, I put myself lower than everyone else in the meeting. Could we do that? Is that part of understanding the totality? Or would we say, I know more than you, listen to me? This is the way it works. Just another thought. Anyone else from the participants list would like to share something or say something or report something. I did want to, and Alex, I think we'll have a longer clip at the end. I thought I'd allow Mr. Kesh again to give his understanding or what he sees happening in the Middle East region. We won't play it all because it's about 26 minutes, I think he went through from about the 3 hour and 20 minutes on, a little longer, maybe 40 minutes or so. I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to look again. I'm thinking it's maybe 26 minutes, but I'd like to at least play about 10 minutes of this to give people, in a way, Mr. Kesh's view about what's actually transpiring in the Middle East. But let's see if we can take any questions from anyone. And again, be on the lookout for those tastes. If you can recall this, you can probably do it and start feeding yourself. I just tried again with the orange, and it seemed I didn't really have the taste of the orange, but my mouth certainly watered. And we've all experienced that when we think about a piece of something we like, or, maybe a nice chocolate cake or something. If you really want it, your mouth does water. But that, I think that's part of the feeding as well. As he said, that's plasmatic water. And I think by thinking about different things, you've actually changed the salinity within that plasmatic water that it can absorb those fields. But he said we're feeding you remotely, so they're doing something as well. But it's, again, our part of the process is for us to learn how to do this on our own. Whether that will take a short amount of time. Again, I think there's systems available or even systems embedded within you. And he's mentioned this again, and as I said earlier in the last workshop, about putting a microchip in a cylinder in a way with this new material, this raw rare earth material, and allow to facilitate the probably the transmutation and the feeding and the wellness and so on, perhaps even energy. But I think we'll probably see some matter state systems coming out in the market before all that happens. That might be 5 years or more away, if we even get there. As he said,
Yes,
with
Mark.
this new system, you can just create a field and allow people to be fed without them even knowing it.
Yes, Mark, I wanted to reinforce what you said there, because I couldn't taste any bananas or any food or anything else like that, and I think a lot had to do with the fact that I really wasn't, interested in that. So, but one thing I did notice, well, not one thing, multiple things. The salivating, the water creation, that was pronounced. I felt that for the first time when I went on one of the monthly sessions
Mm-hmm.
to experience the feeding, and the same result happened back then. I didn't taste the Chinese food, and I didn't taste the pizza, but I sure did get a mouth-watering experience, and I was very happy with that. But the one thing personally that I've been encountering is the hemispheric synchronization, and which kind of exemplifies the need for having the two fields coming together as one, and understanding how that process works. So I've already said that I received a lot of benefit from this happening, and in understanding how this happens, I basically had to change my point of view insofar as we all have goals and aspirations, but we can't hold the Aladdin's lamp in our hand and then rub it vigorously and hope the genie comes out and gives us all these wishes. The wish is your command, so it's not something you want to delegate to some genie. And in that regard, we're all genies, but the thing is not to demand, but it is to um, envision, to have a plasma vision of what it is that you want, and that gives you a gravitational point, you see. And so all the magnetical emissions can, shall we say, gravitate to that point. And and then to express gratitude and thanks for receiving that, and without expectation and without condition. And that's another fundamental thing, because it isn't something that you need to demand. It's like the other day, I got a phone call and it was late in the evening, and the person apologized. I'm so sorry to call you so late. I said, well, that's not a problem. Me personally, I'm glad he called me. So I don't care what time it is, and we had a nice conversation. But I said it's not a problem, and I meant it, and that's the point. That's the point. I could be polite and say, oh, no, no, that's fine. No problem. What do you want? You know, in terms of my own attitude, and which would have been self-defeating. But that was not my attitude, and never has been. So I was responding in kind. The person called and was polite to offer an apology for that, but there was a need. And so I was honored to be in a position to be able to fulfill that need. So my question then is, what can I do to fulfill that need? And would I be uh, in a point of conflict or a controversy, or but I found that it was very graceful, simply by my attitude. And I benefited greatly from that in many ways that I hadn't even anticipated. So we created another construct, another mental construct, which in that regard was another gravitational point. And so, as an example of what I've been talking to you about, as a specific example of a manifestation of a gravitational point fulfillment, I opened my mail today and my wish came true. And I thought to myself, well, I was wishing for this, but I didn't put a timestamp on it. I didn't put a time frame. I didn't say, well, I wish this would happen tomorrow. I just, unconditionally said, like, I wish this would happen. And we aligned ourselves to be open to receiving this wish. And shockingly, uh, I can tell you that almost within 12 hours of creating that gravitational wish, that wish came true. And I'm pleased
Well,
because,
all the souls must have agreed it must have been a correct wish in so many
well,
ways.
that's exactly the point. So, do I have a special skill? I don't have a special skill any more than anybody else has a special skill. But what I'm becoming aware of is that that type of skill exists, and I can be the benefactor of that skill. So I need to be more willing to accept it and to eliminate opposition to it, if you will, scorn, oh, get a life, that kind of attitude, and it's very typical, it's when I say very typical, it's a typical of the Canadian society, where we are disbelieving because of our own personal incredulity. And yet, if we were to entertain ourselves with that possibility, uh, remember, entertainment is fun, and I think when we realize the fulfillment of that possibility, that could be fun as well. And so I can tell you that when I did open this mail, it was it was a very pleasing experience. So That's my little personal story. So thank you.
So you didn't use the magic lamp where you rub it, Aladdin's lamp, and make your wish?
Interestingly enough, I bought a lamp at a flea market, and it's really a beautiful lamp, and it actually reminds me of Aladdin's lamp. And I put what do you call one of those party lights, with multicolored lights that rotate. And so every once in a while, I turn it on, and I feel like having a party.
Well, as we know, the party has just begun, or the fun has just begun. Okay, so we can't search for Aladdin's lamp, but can we find the goose that laid the golden egg? I know people have sought after this goose for eons, saying it was a possibility that we could have a goose that could lay a golden egg. I was just reading in the transcript, because as you said, Alex, if you understand the principle as it's been said, even a stone has a soul. If you understand the strength of the soul of a stone, you can create that stone. And Keshe Foundation has access to this knowledge today. We have developed the technology for this today. We understand how to make gold, how to make gold in a solid matter, to make gold as in gold in the body of the man, and is gold in a plant. We can make the calcium. So again, we probably don't need the mystical Aladdin's lamp or this goose that could lay a golden egg, as we have this is where science is meeting the soul of the man. So we have some of these technologies. And of course, as you showed in that picture, the gold GANs or the gold amino acids, I think you referred to it both ways. You showed that picture of that on the table. And we
Right.
actually saw that applied to someone in Senya.
Mark, the point that's extremely relevant to this whole thing with respect to this production is the reason for that production. So a lot of people are, exclusively looking for the self-serving benefit of that production, right? But that self-serving benefit is automatic. It's not something that you don't need to say, well, I want that and I want that for myself. If you say you want that and you want that for yourself, then you limited the benefits. Now, how is that different? And maybe, I don't know, would a racist joke be appropriate?
I'm sorry, I was adjusting my mic again, right? Did you say is a racist joke acceptable?
Yeah.
No, we're trying to get past the racism, the prejudice. This is a organization that's non-religious, non-racial. This is a space-based organization. So please withhold.
Okay. Okay. So I will withhold. But
Well, if it's a good one, maybe you could share it. No.
well, North Americans would get the joke. Other continents would probably frown on it.
Okay.
But you have to be a racist to appreciate it. Anyway, the thing is that if you are demanding of the purpose, then you limit the possibilities. And anytime you limit the possibilities, it becomes a stopper, a literal roadblock to the path of interaction. And so many times you say, well, that's all I want. I just need to get this done, and then later on I'm going to look at, the other things. And in some cases that becomes very, very important. And we sometimes get trapped in a scheme that's very, very small. So, you know, when you're put in jail, your scheme is extremely tiny. But I've maybe you've heard the stories in some of the secret so-called space programs. And the thing they could never understand, there was a case, and I cannot comment on its veracity. Okay, I'm not making a comment. This was the story. And the story was that someone was taken to a secret place and they came into a secret prison and opened up the cell of one of these secret cells. And inside that jail cell was an extraterrestrial being. And they weren't afraid, like in terms by opening the door, will that thing, lunge? I think if you were to come to a cage of a tiger and you were going to open the door, you would be very hesitant in doing that. You'd be extremely careful, and you'd probably have a lot of protective gear and stuff like that. But in the case of this extraterrestrial, there was no added protection. They just simply opened the door and they said, "Here, I want to show you this guy." And sure enough, this little uh, being, different from humanity, stands up and he, basically looks at you, and they are asking that being to comply with, shall we say, either releasing technology or something or whatever. And that being will not comply with that and is quite content to remain inside the prison cell. So they say, well, how long has he been here? And then it's been years, multiple years, maybe even decades. And he's still there. And he still stands up, and every time you open the door, he comes to the door, and he hasn't atrophied or deteriorated anyway. So he's still there, and they just say, well, we are having a difficulty communicating, so we just close the door again. And well, how long are you going to leave him there? Well, we'll just leave him there until we, find out, how best we can take advantage of him. Well, what is that being doing in the jail cell while he's in confinement? Is he dreaming of a jailbreak? Or is he transmuting to another location the way we do when we go to sleep at night, and then waking up in the morning and arriving back in the jail cell, having accomplished, his daily chores, so to speak, his daily activity? So, what would be your answer to that, Mark?
Quite baffling. I think I know the scenario you're talking about. Was this with something that was called an extraterrestrial biological entity, EBs?
That's right.
Yeah, okay. I've heard that story maybe 10 years ago. Yeah. I
Yeah,
can't
so
think
as
of the
far as you know,
name
he's
that
still
they,
there.
yeah, no, I think they escaped. I think the person interviewing them somehow felt so bad that this entity allowed it to escape. But yes, I was thinking the benefits of transmutation to know it.
Oh, just a moment. Just a moment. So it wasn't a jailbreak. You're saying it was a unlocking of the
Yeah,
door.
somehow, I don't know, I don't remember. I heard this story a long time ago. I can see the interviewer that was interviewing them. I think he had a bald head. I'm trying to think of his name, but I can't think of it. And he was
Oh, that's fine.
somehow picked for this mission to sort of interview or in a way debrief this But maybe that entity didn't know the transmutation, because this is what Mr. Kesh said about those flying in the matter state craft. That the humanity, we were insignificant dust, and now we're going to become more significant dust in the universe. They've considered us universal community, four-wheelers and the rest, but now we'll be teaching them something about transmutation, even though I think a number of them can do that already. But in exchange for perhaps them showing us the advanced matter state UFO type of work. Although Mr. Kesh seems to be on that path of showing the UFO as well. This is one of his, what he had commented about opening the briefcase in Isfahan in
Well,
Iran.
let's
And
let's say, you know, without commenting on whether or not this is real or you know, unreal. If on our planet we have different countries, which is a number that's I think around 189 or something like that. It's a lot of countries, more than, you know, a bunch of countries. It's a big bunch of countries. So why would we assume that if there were EBEs, as you said, that there will only be one? Is that logical? Is that reasonable?
no,
Right.
there's always more.
Yeah. So, you know, the way it's presented to us is us and they are them. And
Right, not realizing they're from the same creator as we are.
yeah, but we come in different flavors. So shouldn't it stand to reason that they also maybe come in different flavors?
Sure, as Mr. Kesh said, the creator shows himself in trillions of faces across the universe.
Okay, so I think when you start to consider that, then all of a sudden you have begun to expand beyond the conventional limitations of our, shall we say, formal education. And this is confounding to a lot of people because the major bragging point, if you will, on that education is the diploma and the certificate which they can hang on the wall, which certifies that they have, you know, accomplished something.
Okay, perhaps any of the participants want to share something, perhaps that happened to them in the transmutation session, or perhaps in the last workshop. As Mr. Kesh said, be on the lookout in the next week or two for any of these things that may impact you. Or, as he said, it's not only physical pain, it could be something emotional. You've been sad, and now that burden, in a way, or that field has been lifted in a way, or you've become elevated in a way to surpass that field can't contain you. So be on the lookout, and also report to the Kesh Foundation, as this helps the doctors and the team to understand more. One of your backgrounds, anyone here,
Can I
again,
can I
go
jump
ahead.
in?
Oh, please. That's why you're here.
Jump in. Jalal is away, so um, I just wanted to share that what Alex mentioned happened for me as well a few weeks ago in gosh, it would have been, I guess, September session, the extreme dry mouth after, excuse me, and during the session, salivating a lot and swallowing, that kind of feeling like, wow, I really need this. And as you guys were talking a minute ago, I had the thought pop in my mind, which was, what a better way to feed us than to have us create the saliva in our mouth that we need to have it drop in and create the seed for the energy to meet us, rather than eating a potato or anything else. We've just created exactly what we need in our own body to attract the fields that we need from the universe. So that's very interesting.
That's it. That's one of the keys, I think. The emotional change, the salinity within the saliva, or it's not saliva, he said, it's plasmatic water.
which would have amino acids as well. So we're feeding ourselves on another level too.
Yeah, I didn't ever get any of the banana or anything else. Very similar to you, Alex, in that regard. And but after the October, or sorry, after the September session, I was extremely yeah, just tired, feeling quite tired for about a day and a half, and kind of thought to myself, what have I done to myself? Have I been feeding myself from the wrong energy field here? And yeah, it took me a number of days, and then I had a moment which was very interesting. I was sitting at a cafe and working on my computer, and just turned my head to my friend and felt my neck go out, and then spent about a week in quite quite a lot of physical discomfort until I finally was able to see a chiropractor to set some of the bones in the spine. And so that's been a very drastic shift physically. And I'm not sure if that was a related incident, but there were no more coincidences in my awareness, so I thought that's probably related. And yeah, anyway, I thought I would share that.
I can add something, Nikolai. Uh, Again, no, we're October. I think it was the August session, and I had literally, I had a bone change its position, and it was a lot of discomfort. The bone had almost, well, it didn't push out of the skin, but it certainly did raise a bump on the skin. And I thought, where did I bruise myself or something? And there wasn't a lot covering the bone. So you know that there's some areas in your body that you push and it's very fluffy, like maybe a pot belly. But this was the bone was very close to the surface, and it was also pinching a nerve for me. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just wait to see what happens. And it reminded me of an injury that I had picked up when in a couple of decades earlier, and that injury caused me a lot of pain in that hand. And I have a feeling that this realignment of the bone was how shall we say, a realignment of the bone back to its original state. So it literally had to bend the bone to put it back to the way it was before. And then, it took me, in my mind, a really long time. It took about 3 weeks for me to get the tingling out of my hand, but it's now back to normal, and the bone is back down into, actually it was in the wrist. It had kind of lifted up from the wrist, and then it went back down into the wrist. And if you think about that, of all the things that are moving on your body, I know the bones flex, but you know to bend like that, uh, there's something else going on. I can bend my elbow and I can bend my fingers, but to bend a bone,
And no
I,
pain?
yeah. Well, the pain, I didn't have the pain in the bone. I had the pain of the bone exercising on the area around it.
No, but
Because
I mean when it was reset.
no, I have no pain today.
No,
Gone.
no, I mean there was no pain in that process.
No,
Okay,
no,
that's what I was asking.
no. The the process of the bone um, disfiguring and then the reconfiguring, there was no pain in that process. The discomfort had to do with the pinching of the nerves once the bone had moved into the new position. And then as it restored back to its original position, it released that pinching, and then that came back. So
So that's the work of the soul. As he
Exactly.
said, when the soul does the work, or to change the dimension within the dimension of physicality, there's no pain. As he said with the woman that was bent over. And if you straightened her up right away, you'd break her back. And this is an impossibility in science, but when it's done through the soul, everything is accommodated for. There's no pain.
But I have a problem, Mark, amongst many problems.
You're not the only one. Go ahead.
No, it's like I busted a hole in my exhaust in the car, and when I started up, it sounds like one of those race
Oh, yeah.
cars. And the guy came up to me and he says, "Well, what's your problem?" And I said, "Oh, I spilled some dust on the floor." And he looked at me and he thought, "Well, that was not the problem I was referring to." So I said, you have your idea of what constitutes a problem, and I have my idea of what constitutes a problem. Okay. So, but the problem that I have with the salivating that I was telling you about is that it's again, and this happened at the same time in that previous session. So I'll add to this um, description here is that I could taste better. So as you know, sometimes your tongue gets coated. It is a pathway for elimination of toxins, and when the toxins come on your tongue, then you have a funny taste in your mouth. But all of a sudden, things started to taste really, really good. So my problem is, in a sentence, how am I going to stop eating food physically when the food that I'm eating tastes so good? This is a problem.
You're going to be fully satisfied when you're fed this way. I know it. I've experienced a taste of it, let's say.
Yeah, but it's like really, really good. It's, you know, I went to a, I went to a restaurant, a fancy restaurant, and the food was terrible. And I said, this is what I need to cure me from eating a lousy chef. And I'm a lousy chef, but I'm better than him. And so that's my problem.
And he said that you can eat periodically, you may want to eat for the pleasure of it. This is why we're here in the physical state. But let's move away from it if we can. And we have technology to do that. And you'll see, you'll be fully satiated. There'll be no hunger, no hunger pains. It'll be like, how come? What's happening? I think we'll see this in some of these people that, again, he said we can embed these fields within certain communication devices or in certain advertising or in other ways.
So, Mark, I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to continue to present, and we're going to carry on with this session. I hope you're enjoying this. Well,
Well, I
it's
am. I haven't
it's
heard from the rest, but we always get very good accolades at the end in the chat and thanking you for continuing on. How about that background you had about prosperity? And there's a couple of what Mr. Kesh has mentioned about prosperity, where most of us think the wealth is in the pocket of the man. And this is how, oh, he's worth 50 million. Oh, he's worth a billion. Oh, he's worth 500 million. Wow, I'm impressed. And we always considered this that the wealth is in the pocket of the man. But Mr. Kesh has explained to us that the wealth is in the knowledge of the universe as opposed to the physical pocket. And then there was another one that he used, and he said something about the wealth is being within the man, not belonging to the man. And this is where everyone makes a mistake because we're so ingrained with this money, and the more, a lot of people, oh, better. Obviously, I want to find out what it's like to live that way. But again, these two things, and as we heard in one of the earlier ones, the Vanderbilt mansion or Biltmore mansion, which took 5 years and 5,000 men to build, 175 rooms, well, again, by the Vanderbilt family or something. Again, that's building a throne in the physical dimension, which we're being instructed in a way to look past that. This is only a temporary position, more or less. So again, the wealth is not in the pocket, but in the knowledge. Just to share those points. Anyone else want to share anything with us today? As I said, I'd like to play about 10 minutes of the 26-minute clip about Mr. Kesh discussing the events in the Middle East and how he's perceiving it. Of course, he's asked both sides to stand down, and we'll see. Of course, the Iranians didn't listen, and neither have the Israelis, but hopefully we'll see a change in position, or I'll let him explain what he foresees here. But obviously they're preparing or being prepared in case something happens. They'll be able to feed and provide medication remotely. And of course, it's already been shown. Not in the public. We haven't heard testimonials or anything like that, but apparently the feedback or from the charts is quite, and Mr. Kesh said he'll reveal some of these charts about actually what's happening in the sessions in the future, but it needs to be shared. And so we'll see that. But there's a lot of beautiful things that are happening in the background. And again, we're only seeing a very small portion of this very large technology.